Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay
This
Moore.
is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan
This is
East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
I am David C. Baker, and you are watching the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John Leon Guerrero and Pete A. Turner.
If you're watching on LinkedIn, you probably know who David C. Baker is already because he's been on there a bunch. He writes constantly and expansively. You are comfortable talking about just about any topic. You've written a book on expertise. We can get into that. But in general, you've been on the show before. I'll put the link up for the old episode because they're really never old. This is extensions of conversations. What are your thoughts in general on extensions of conversations, Dave?
If they're lubricated, they usually yield much better results. So I'm fine with that. I mean, if you're not changing your mind, that must have been 4 years ago when that book came out. So if you're not changing your mind over 4 years, then you're probably stuck in something.
Yeah. What is your preferred lubricant for conversations?
Anything that involves tequila, because I've heard that picks you up and isn't a depressant. So I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I stick with.
I like it. Well, look, you write all the time on LinkedIn about a variety of things. And one of the things you encourage people to do is for themselves to write, not necessarily even professionally, but just to pick up the pen, hit the keys and do whatever and express themselves in a way. How did you get to that point?
I think it probably came from, I would guess, sort of an academic sort of angle in that you've got to do a lot of writing in school. And so I developed a love for that. I'm also a really deep introvert. So far off the introvert versus extrovert scale, I say it's down sort of in Unabomber land. And so I love speaking to large groups, but I'd prefer speaking to 5,000 people than mingling with people afterwards individually. So it's pretty natural for me to just sort of hide in writing. But the main reason, like from a business standpoint, is really, I don't know how else I'm going to figure out what I believe until I begin articulating it. And the articulation is what creates the clarity. It's not, in my mind anyway, it's not like, oh, I figured out what I believe and now I'm going to write about it. I don't figure that out until I'm writing it. And then just secondarily, from a new business standpoint, goodness gracious, you've got to give Google something to work with. The world, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, it didn't matter all that much. And then 25 years ago, where the inability to articulate a coherent concept only showed up when the principal had to discover that email is going to be a permanent part of life. And then since then, it's just so integral. If I had young kids again, and I don't think I made this realization early enough, that would be the non-negotiable. You're going to write, even if nobody reads it, because it helps you think. It gives Google something to work with. I don't know. I'm just so in love with writing.
And writing, when you get into words, you find, the other day I was obsessed by this topic, and you because when you deal with words, you get to have these kind of things: hopping, hoping, and hooping. And then you just think about that, and the next thing you know, you're breaking open an etymology book, and you're looking at the etymology of things, and you realize just how interconnected these things are. And I think, for me at least, it expands my ability to pick a word or to whatever it is, to communicate more clearly, because I'm spending time thinking about these silly little trivial things, but they add to the pyramid of knowledge that you have.
Yeah. Do you ever listen to the podcast called Lexicon Valley?
No, I need to though, I guess.
Yeah, it's all about words, and it's so interesting. And then I also read Kevin Williamson's Tuesday article and every week in National Review. And he'll write on something that I usually find interesting, but then the last fourth of his article is always about words and how they're misused and how to use them appropriately. My training is really in linguistics, and so I love words. Yeah, and to me, writing is almost like an addiction, in the sense that I find myself getting itchy and uncomfortable and squirmy, and the only solution for it is to write something. And then I calm down, and then a week later it all comes back where I have to write. It's an outlet for me that has been a lifelong thing, and I'm grateful for it. Actually, I think really I'm a writer who consults because writers don't make enough money. Yeah.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. So same thing with folks who talk, especially with the pandemic. Boy, my business was going in one direction. The pandemic came, and because I'm a guy who's willing to grab his stuff and come and meet you and sit face to face and teach you how to podcast or teach you how to ask questions. Everybody thinks they know how to host something, David, until all of a sudden you realize you're flying an airplane, and there's a lot of knobs and gadgets and sliders and doohickeys that you've got to manage when you're having the conversation. And you and I talked off mic about the comfort of not knowing where the conversation's going to go. That's an art, and that's a developed skill. It's not just we're going to have this rambling conversation. Have no doubt, like when I'm doing this with you, we're going where I ultimately am comfortable letting you go, right? I'll let you run all day long, but there's a design in what I'm doing. I mean, that comes from years of being a spy in a combat zone. I know how to ask questions. I know how to shut up. I know how to look. I can get way beyond closed questions. I can get in depth in that. But folks often think that they can just sit down and earn people's attention without any kind of design or professional capacity to do so.
If you had a client who came to you who's really intelligent and had a lot of money, and they wanted to do something completely different in a podcast, how would you wave a magic wand? Because the assumption is, okay, it's got to come out every week or every 2 weeks. It needs to be 30 to 60 minutes. You need to have interesting guests. It just seems like such a tired, I don't know. I've thought about starting another podcast someday that will be, I'm going to call it Briefcast. I have the domain, like I haven't done anything with it. And it's only going to be 16 minutes long or something. I don't want to necessarily answer the question for you, but it feels like there's just so much sameness in podcasts. I mean, what would you do differently?
Yeah, I mean, that's the sort of thing, like I'm sort of obliged to continue to do what I do, and there are things that I want to do instead. The thing that I am specifically obsessed about now and trying to see if I can get it to fly, because I got the parts, I can put the engine together, but do I need to, has it earned my attention? Has it earned my energy? Has it earned my money? And the thing that I was thinking about, and there definitely is a hole in the market for this, and we learned about it primarily from Joe Rogan, because he kind of leads the way in this, was when he had Donald Trump on his show, and he's like, I'll have Donald Trump and Joe Biden on. Let's do a debate right here in an actual format where you can describe, we're talking complex things. Ukraine, Russia, 90 seconds? Come on.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not real. So I would love to give not just federal level candidates, but local candidates a chance to speak clearly about their platform, and then not to attack them, I'm not trying to do Mike Wallace, but to say, how do you pay for that? How do you build consensus to do that? And then talk about the things that really matter. And then what happens when you're wrong, about whatever your policy is going to be. And again, not in a way to challenge or put someone down, but to give them a chance to really shine and show that, hey, I've given this a lot of thought. You may be wrong. Maybe you're not the right guy, but I've given this a lot of thought. I would love to see I'd love to see a bunch of someone's do that. And not to, as the host, I would say in the traditional sense, my job is to not have my politics inform anything else about the show. It's about that person. So if we're doing a town hall, my job is to facilitate, not to politicize.
Right. And the more unscripted and transparent the conversation, the more it will hold people's interest. When I think about, I don't even know what we're talking about today, but this is interesting. Like when I think about some of the very best the people that ask questions the best, I think one of them is probably Tyler Cohen. And it's a little bit robotic, but it's really, he asks the questions that I find myself wanting to ask his guests. Rather, the opposite end of that spectrum would be completely scripted. It's always these 12 questions, and you come prepared, and the listener knows exactly what to expect. It feels so sterile. I just feel like the medium is still missing so much humanity in it. And that's whether I've listened to 3 episodes of Rogan. I don't have the time to listen to most of them, but what strikes me about it is that it's a conversation that's unscripted. That's what I like about it.
Yeah, and taking the idea of giving opportunities for candidates to talk at greater length on complicated topics, or just to reveal who they are, because it's a whole lot easier to like Bernie Sanders or anybody, Ted Cruz, if you actually get to sit down with them and have a conversation. And you can't do that, but you can do it on the air. So when I floated this around as like a market study and to see what people have said, my friends who are in politics are like, no way am I doing that. Too dangerous. Too. And I'm like, well, then this is exactly why we need to do it, because the people who are new, who are like, I'm tired of what you're doing, aren't going to fear that. And that's going to move the market. I think at least some. And again, the point here is not to advance any kind of political anything. It's to say, hey, the people who want to do this, let's hear from them. Let's not hear talking points. Let's hear a developed idea and really be able to dive into what it is. So I'd love to have someone who was into who had the capability to do that, who could swallow their ego and ask the question and know what the next thing is. Because I often say when I do this, I'm listening for things, not to I hear what you're saying, but I'm listening for the thing that I need to be ready for, so that maybe 2-3 questions down the line, I've guided you to where I need you to be to really give us that big answer.
Oh yeah, active listening is exhausting if it's done well. It's rather than passive listening. And you can tell when a host is not listening carefully, because you kind of give them a 3-second notification that, okay, I'm going to start talking now, because I'll lower my voice, and then there'll be this pause, and it catches the host by surprise, and you can tell, because the next question is a non sequitur. It doesn't even follow the conversation. They haven't been listening carefully enough. And it's weird too. I've been on so many podcasts for different reasons, and you have a very human conversation with the host, and then the tape rolls, and then they turn into somebody else.
Oh, yeah.
And it's weird.
it is weird. It is weird. And the other thing that I think, in terms of I'm trying to keep up with the sun and my settings on my camera, because the sun's moving so fast. The other thing about these newer ideas, these newer concepts, if you're a great conversationalist, well, not everybody can be a great conversationalist, right? So if you think that's it, you need to be able to go deeper in that with what you're doing. And so if you're looking at someone who's new and trying to do something and they've got the means to do it, I want to find out what they're already great at. And then the biggest thing I do as an executive producer of a podcast is I try to kill their show. I try to go like, do you really need to do this? This is an actual business. You have to market, you have to do PR, you have to. Do you need to do this? If this is a way to drive revenue, I'm going to tell you right now, go sell something on Etsy, Shopify, something that's going to give you more gratification than being one of millions of people, especially when you're competing with people like Jason Bateman, who has a fantastic podcast.
Oh, does he? I just finished watching the last episode of Ozark. That's the same Jason Bateman, right?
Yeah. Him and 3 of his very famous actor friends all have a show, and they have very famous friends that have on the show. So if a person has 5 hours of podcast listening in the week, well, they just sucked up 1 hour,
Wow.
And it gets really crowded, right? And so my job as the executive producer, is this idea worth producing? Is it worth your time? It's one of the biggest values that I create for people. So if someone was to come be like, I have money, I want to do something totally new, we got to find a new spot in the market, because you're not going to compete in conversation with Jason Bateman reliably and repeatedly.
I know I'm not anyway. I do a podcast with a good friend of mine, and we started it 5 years ago, and we decided to never have any guests. It's just he and I having a conversation, and we take turns with a topic. And if it's my turn to pick the topic, then I'll send him 3 paragraphs, a few hours before, and then he just interviews me. And because we know each other well, and we can manage the hills and the valleys and the conversational tone and flow and everything, we're not selling anything. We take no supporters. It's not a money thing. It is a new business thing, but that's always secondary. We just enjoy plumbing the depths of a topic and helping people. And it wasn't my idea. When he came up with the idea, I thought, oh, I don't know. That seems like a lot of work. I don't know how we'd monetize that. It probably wouldn't work, but okay, I'll do it. You're my friend. And the impact on his business and my business is just almost incalculable. It's just because we're there having real conversations with real people. We share from our personal lives, and we're there to help people. We're never selling anything. And I think there's something about that just kind of, the karma just spins back to you, right? It's great. It's a great medium for certain things.
It really is a great medium for certain things. And by the way, I am selling something. So if you have a podcast or for sure, Pete at breakitdownshow.com. Also, just go to breakitdownshow and .com and hit the PayPal button, and you can do your own little subscription. I don't need Patreon. I need you. And then what I do for that is I replace old equipment. I get in my truck and I go on the road. I market the show, and I have a budget for these things. So this is how you support me and what I do. I'm not asking for you to buy anybody else's mattress or anybody else's gloves. I'm just saying, hey, kick $5, $10, $15 a month into the pot for Pete so I can go out and do things. Thanks for letting me plug myself there for a second, David.
You're welcome. And I did not set you. You didn't tell me to do that. I just stumbled right into that pitch for you.
And I'm supposed to do that more. Like, that's what all my friends who coach me on. Like, why don't you do that more? And I'm like, well, all right, I will. Please, somebody go to PayPal and put a couple bucks in. By the way,
go ahead.
Everything is there. Go there for dates, tons of writing, book, everything. Go ahead.
I had a friend that subscribes to my weekly email who wrote me back recently and said, I don't think a lot of people really know what you do. And I kind of scratched my head and said, how is that possible? And he said, well, you never really sell your services except for maybe a little link or two. And most everybody tells me that I've earned the right to sell my services more. And it just becomes, and I think I probably am just turned off too much by sales so that it infiltrates the way I want to conduct myself professionally. But I think of doing a podcast episode or writing something or speaking or whatever it is as putting a small amount of goodwill in the bank. And every once in a while, if you've done a good job doing that, you can make a withdrawal, kind of like you did just a minute ago. But if you don't make enough deposits, then it looks like you're just robbing an ATM because you haven't earned that right.
Yeah, you have to earn the right? And I don't mind asking for something simple like that because I think it's evident that I do a lot of things. I do write. I do talk a lot. And I do try to get on the road. One of the things that maybe, for sure makes me different is I'll grab my gear, I'll get in my truck, and I'll go to someone's house. So if feasible, I'll be in, in fact, next week, speaking of the political thing, next month I'll be in Arizona, and I'm going to grab a candidate his name's Eli Crane. He's running for Congress. He's not the only one I'm grabbing, but I'm going to go to his spot and we're going to do it live right there. And I think there's power in that. And I think there's value in that people appreciate. And then if I'm saying, hey, just $100 for a tank of gas, not that big of a deal, and people want to do that kind of support if you've earned it. 1,300 episodes in, all the kind of incredible guests, musicians, everything. I've earned that ask, not from everybody, but from enough people that I can reliably, go, okay, my show is not just a hobby,
Well, if you ever get to Nashville, be sure to look me up. I'm sitting here on top of a hill with a 360-degree view everywhere, 61 acres on a farm, and I'm a gentleman farmer, which means I just like buying equipment but not using it. Let me know. We'll do something.
Yeah, well, we were going to come out to Nashville last fall, but right when the COVID bloom hit you guys, I couldn't in good conscience come out and expose you or be exposed because that doesn't do anybody any good. And I can do my shows remotely. So we did something else instead. But Nashville's for sure on the list of places that we're trying to get back to as soon as possible.
Great.
One of the things that's interesting about all of this stuff, the podcast thing, and if you're willing to get in your truck and go somewhere, is I can kind of do the Charles Kuralt thing. And if I had a little more money coming in, if someone would fund that, I would love to go show us who we are because, yes, we're all a bunch of assholes. However, when you meet us individually, we're a lot more likable, and that means doing things that we do. It means going to churches. Stop just boxing people up and saying all evangelicals are this. Well, let me go to their house. Let me go to their church. Let me go see these people, folks who are worried about social consciousness and equity. Let's go talk to these people face to face in their domain. And I'll tell you what, we're going to find a lot about how beautiful this country is, because we don't get to hear that story enough.
Well, a third of a mile from where I live, and I drive past this home many times a day, there's a U.S. flag in front, and then underneath it is a Confederate flag. And I've been looking for an excuse to meet this guy. I don't know his name. I've never met him. Well, not officially. And why are you doing this? And are you worried about the message, about the offense it causes? So the other day in a storm, a tree came down in his front yard, and I rushed to my tractor. I put the grapple on the front and a big weight on the back. And I thought I'm going to drive down here and I'm just going to help him clear this, and maybe we'll have an opportunity to chat. He'd already cleaned up the mess before I got there, so it didn't happen. But that's kind of how I'm reading what you're saying. It would be pretty easy to make a pretty big sweeping judgment about this fella, and it would be a very safe judgment to make if I wanted to go on Twitter and post a picture of it. But there is a person behind this, and chances are the person is intelligent but really misguided, and I want to know the reason. I want to know why you're doing this, and I want to understand that, and then I want to share my perspective on it. But I think that's one thing that we've lost, is just hurdling things across this wall on people that we don't know, and making lots of assumptions about them.
Yeah, the assumption thing, and then also the binary results. Right. Life just isn't binary, man. It's just not.
Yeah. I changed my Twitter bio recently, and I said I'm hopelessly homeless, both spiritually and politically, and don't really know where to turn. And that's an example of growing up. I thought I believed a whole lot of things, and I could recite them to you. And it was almost like, and they were not deeply held beliefs. They were inherited beliefs. And now I believe far fewer things, but I believe those few things far more deeply around people, around the role of faith, around the role of art, around entrepreneurship, and things. You'd think that things would get clear as I get older, and they don't. They're a lot more muddled. Some things get clearer, but most of the rest of it is still kind of up for grabs for me. That's what I mean by homeless politically and religiously.
Yeah, well, I'm almost exactly the same thing. The political side, if you ask me my opinion on stuff, you're going to find out that I'm a hypocrite.
Yeah, like I can't shoot an animal, but I can sure eat meat.
Oh man, I hate to see things die, but I love pigs, and yeah, absolutely. So you asked me about whatever, the hot topics, abortion or this or that, whatever. I have definite opinions. I like to think that they're well thought out. I try not to fly off the handle too much, because that's dumb. Mm-hmm. But sometimes you just got to kind of take a flyer on what you think on something. Now, in certain areas where I have a lot of experience, like with modern conflict, modern war, I can speak intelligently because I'm an expert in that. But my expertise, this expertise is very narrow, right? It's peaky. And so I can talk.
It's different than opinions too. Expertise is not the same thing as opinions. Yeah.
Right. Like, should we be involved in this Ukrainian-Russian conflict? That's too strategic. I can talk tactically. So I can say, when you get there, if you decide to go, it's not going to go as easily as you want. And then when you try to leave, it's going to be really hard to leave, because you're going to look around back, this place is messed up now, So I can talk about those things very clearly. Should we be there? No. And I can say this, as a nation, and I'm not trying to have a political conversation, as a nation, we've seen what Joe Biden and his crew have done over the last 20 years that he's been and had any kind of influence politically. And the record is not good. So they haven't earned our respect and our confidence, because they've mostly screwed up. And when the Secretary of Defense stands in front of Americans and says, I can't tell you how many Americans are in Afghanistan, I also can't protect them, why are you getting involved in other conflict then? Because that one has Americans in it, and so and that's not denigrating anything, but if you're going to want that job and you're going to want to make these big decisions, you get the hammer thrown at you when you screw it up. And all those guys have done is screw up the Arab Spring, Libya, over and over again. So Yeah, but that's where my expertise stops. It's really narrow in that closet. And I'm like, I got to shut up now. Because I won't know about, how we're going to deal with turkey and oil and oh my God, it gets crazy.
Well, that's sort of the overlap between what you just said and expertise is kind of important because the world is so much more complex than it used to be, which means, and yet our minds haven't changed. They haven't developed that much over the last few decades. And so that's one of those realizations that hit me like, oh my God, to know a lot about everything is just too big a job. I'm going to have to, if I'm going to really be an expert in something, I'm going to have to narrow that down. But that's only going to be half of my life. The other half of my life is going to be very broad, where I skim the surface and I develop opinions and I read from other people. So I think of it as sort of a T-shaped thing. So my expertise is the vertical line, and my horizontal exploration is what makes the top of the T. And together, those keep me planted. So my expertise isn't unhinged from what's really happening in the world, but I'm also not pretending to be an expert in all of these other things. So if you have, to use the example you just gave, if a listener has a really tightly held belief about what we should do in Ukraine, and they're not at that high strategic level, then they're probably not thinking very deeply, because it is a mess. There are not really clear answers here. And that's true even at the top. But imagine us yokels down here without a lot of information. It's like it's sort of a epistemological humility. That's a phrase I saw somebody use the other day. I love that phrase. It's like, I'm going to have opinions, but I'm really going to be open to them changing.
Yeah, right. Comfort with being wrong. Because if you reach a certain age and you realize, if you haven't traveled enough and been wrong enough to realize that you lack perspective, and you are wrong way more often than you even possibly realize. And when I say this, I mean you are wrong and you don't realize it, and you realize that you don't realize it, and you you really accept that you're a very flawed thinker no matter what you do, because then you'll read a book and you learn everything about what you don't know, and you realize you have 10 more books to read just to begin to understand what you don't know. It's just that's growing old. That's what happens as we get wiser and older, and you learn that the mountain of knowledge, it's ever expanding.
Yeah, and I think since it's an impossible task to know so much about so many things, I think kind of a self-protective mechanism that we have to develop is to learn how to spot bullshit when we're listening to somebody who is quote unquote an expert. We need to have these filters that fly up and say, wait a second, there's something about that doesn't have the ring of truth. Almost anytime you hear any politician speak, it's the same thing. It's like red flags are flying up. These are talking points. It's not really as simple. It's way more complex than he or she is saying. So that is a skill, is learning how to listen to other people and know who to rely on and who not to, right? And I don't have any answers about that, but I do really think it's a skill.
I like folks who provide an alternate perspective than you're prepared to receive. Doesn't make it right or wrong, but it makes you go, man, I haven't thought about this deeply enough if I'm surprised by this adjacent approach to this problem. And folks that do that reliably, I find them to be, especially, and this is true like in the Green Beret community, they'll say the most practical, tactical thing. You're like, I hadn't even thought about that. Damn, I have no idea what I'm talking about. Right. So those people that just can smack you in the face with reality, I love that.
And intentionally reading or absorbing information from people whose perspectives are really opposite of yours. So every day I read Freddie DeBoer's stuff, who's a self-confessed socialist, because I love to understand how he thinks, right? And I feel like I can have much smarter conversations with other people if I'm exposed to, I come from more of a conservative economic background, to read him or Michelle Tandler on Twitter, progressive from San Francisco, or somebody who's really, really conservative, listening to them and thinking, what kind of logical leaps are they making? It's like, we can't be afraid of all of that stuff, but there's so much information out there. I think you have to be disciplined, because you can't have the time. You got to people who are consistently thoughtful, like Matty Iglesias, for instance, and you can say, okay, these are the thoughtful people who have different perspectives that I need to listen to, and then fold all that into your worldview to see if it fits. And if it doesn't fit, well, don't force it. Just try to figure out what's missing in your perspective on something, right? And it's kind of a curious process. It's what keeps me most alive, is constantly learning. That's, if I quit constantly learning about things, and it doesn't even have to be about my area of expertise, then I just start to die. It's what keeps me interested and enthused and engaged.
I'm going to put up a couple links here real quick for everybody. So this Frederick DeBoer has been on the Break It Down show. There's a great link to that.
Oh, cool.
I totally agree. Like, he wrote a book called The Cult of Smart, and he talks about, the education system. And we all know that the education system is not delivering what we want it to deliver. We sure as hell can't agree on what to do about it. We can't even, and the bullshit part comes out when we can't even discuss what a voucher system might look like if it ran well. And when a voucher system geographically matters, like geographics, geography impacts what we do and how we do it tremendously, but we're not even allowed to discuss it because there's only one answer. And so having someone like Freddie DeBoer come on the show and being able to hear what he has to say informs like how I see a lot of these things. And we agree, we want to do a better job on education. Is there an area where we agree we can work on specifically? And there probably is something.
Yeah.
The other book is Frankfurt's On Bullshit. I love that book. You can read that over and over again. It's a short read, but I think that book is great because it does help you suss out what is and what isn't bullshit.
Yeah. Finally tune your transistors so that you get a little warning light when it starts to hear it.
Yeah. One of my bullshit indicators is when someone says the words, and this is just a rule of thumb. It's not a hard and fast. When someone says, first, we know the first order, but the second and third order consequences of that, we don't know what they're going to be. That person hasn't thought about that problem deeply enough, because you can't just say those words. There needs to be some contextualized thought about what second and third order effects might be. Otherwise you're just saying something. It's like folks who comment on sports, and I love sports, but I can't listen to sports radio because nothing is ever said. It's all just pantomime, parroted, performative. It's not like, where's the look, you were a professional baseball player for 25 years or whatever it is, right? And you can't say anything original. Well, then why am I listening to you? And so that's that bullshit detector for me.
Yeah.
Do you have one like that?
For me, I've never really thought about that, but I would say the first thing that comes to mind is that I get leery when I hear people who make statements that are too broad and not nuanced. So that's when I start listening more carefully for the bullshit. So it's so easy. If you go to Twitter, there's very little. I almost said there's no nuance on Twitter, right? I just fell into my own trap. There's not much nuance on Twitter.
Yeah.
And so I just think the world is more complicated. It's not black and white. There are really good reasons why progressives and conservatives believe what they do, but I don't want blanket statements that just say something and doesn't really, it makes me think that they haven't gone very deep, because it's not quite that simple. There's a lot of complexity to it. So non-nuanced language would be the bullshit flag for me.
This is sort of adjacent to what you're talking about now, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. I've been thinking a lot about faith and to be God-fearing. We've, as a nation, started to walk away from a traditional religious background. And with that comes a trade-off, and there's not that God-fearing, holding yourself accountable thing. Look, we've grown in a lot of ways that are better than the olden days, but what's holding you spiritually accountable? What's holding you accountable to make the right decision, even when your id and your ego and your superego are all saying, hey, just go left. No one cares. That individual right versus a group right that you have to defend through something like faith, where you're part of something bigger and you owe it to maybe tamp down what you desire over, what's better for the greater good. What are your thoughts on religion and how we deal with these things these days?
Well, my perspective is pretty deeply informed by a very narrow worldview that I grew up in. My parents were medical missionaries. They were Protestant Christians, so it wasn't a denomination, but very typical conservative Christianity. And I remember one of the books that I read. Let's see, it was written by Miller, and it was called "The Myth of Certainty." And that got me thinking. It should have been on a banned book list because it really did undermine the typical message that any conservative religion would have, no matter what the flavor of it. But I remember listening to somebody speak in a service, and it was kind of like a church service, but it was more of a chapel. And he said, and in the original Hebrew and Greek, what this means is such and such. And immediately it just shut down my brain because I didn't have access to verify what he said. All of a sudden, it wasn't about logic. He said, this is what it means. And of course, I had no access to that. So that prompted me to go into linguistics and to learn many languages. And one of the first learnings there was like, that's bullshit. That doesn't mean that at all. That's just what you want it to mean. Right. And you don't, linguistics, meaning does not go down to the word level. Meaning goes down to the paragraph or the sentence level. And so that set me on a really deep path. And that's one of the things I'm most confused about. So there are three things I believe about faith. One is that there is a God of some kind. I have no idea beyond that. I just know, it just seems like it takes a whole lot more faith in my world to imagine that this all happened by chance over millions of years. I just want to laugh. I want to laugh so hard I'm peeing in my pants to think that that's true. So that's the first. The second is that if that's true, then whoever that power is must care about us or we'd be dead. And third, it kind of matters how I live. I don't know, and that's all. The rest of it all up for grabs for me. If you translate this through Muslim eyes or maybe through Mormon eyes or whatever, but like if we just pretend, let's then translate it through conservative Christianity's eyes. If Jesus came back, of course, a lot of assumptions behind that word, right? That phrase. But if Jesus came back, he would want nothing to do with organized religion. That's a firm belief I have. Yeah. So I don't know. It's just, but I also don't know, like if you don't have some kind of core beliefs like that, then why does it matter how you live? The typical answer is, well, as a community, if we don't defer some of our gratification, or if we don't treat others like we want to be treated, then it will all fall apart. But that's hollow to me. It's like, well, so what if it falls apart? As long as I've got my part. Anyway, so I'm very confused about all of that. It's one of those areas where I've let go of so many things I used to believe, and I only believe a few things, but I believe them a lot more deeply now.
One of the things I've learned along the way, as I've learned that I make way more mistakes than I'm able to even comprehend that I make, is that the same is true for basically everybody else. And we move at different speeds, and our intention to write the right words may not line up with our capability. And I know every time I read something, if I read an old essay or whatever it is from 10 years ago, I'm like, didn't nail that. I thought, I know that it wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. So then you think, well, that's true for almost every author ever, right? And so you realize you're translating something into a different language that's been translated a whole bunch of times, and they don't all agree. And then you also have the fallibility of the author in place, and you realize, oh my gosh, what if they just couldn't communicate clearly enough this complex thing? What if it was beyond their ability to communicate? Like the conquistadors, when they write about things, and Carvajal and those guys, when they were writing, trying to describe something they'd never seen before,
right.
We can't. It's fallible,
Yeah, right. But that's not allowed. That perspective is not allowed in conservative Christianity. There is no room for a fallible set of 66 books that were all put together in some divine magical sense, and there can be no contradictions between them. And yes. I'm just thinking, oh my God, like if you really if you really believe that this stuff is important, then you quit trying to squeeze things into something. You just let it speak, even if it tends to contradict itself. Slavery was a part of that world. How women were treated was a part of that world. And the gymnastics that people jump to try to justify how it was a part of, like, no, sorry, like if just using conservative Christianity as an example, if the Bible is infallible, then it's infallible. There just isn't any room for it. And I much prefer a more nuanced view where very good people were writing really important things that have a lot to do with life. Is it beyond that? I'm not sure. Most people would disagree with me and say there's a lot more to it than that, but I'm just not sure.
When you think about what's most interesting about the people that you get to know, and you get to meet a lot of people because of what you do, I know politics is nowhere near the top, but what is the most interesting thing about people when you meet them? What's your sense for what's at the top of that list?
Well, I guess maybe because of the environment that we're living in right now, this is very front of mind, but I do not experience the same racial tension that I keep reading about. Now, obviously, I'm an older white male, so I don't mean that I'm not, say, Black or Hispanic, and so I don't know what they're talking about. I don't mean that. I just mean I don't sense the personal animosity to me as a white person that if all I did was stay home and I read Twitter and I listened to news, I would think that as soon as I stepped out of my castle, I would be beaten down on the streets for all of my privilege. And the truth is that the people that I interact with, they don't know what I do for a living, or I don't think they care really. It's just like, I don't know. It's like two worlds. And I'm very open to learning more about how I'm missing the plot. But it seems to me like the more local you think, the less tension there is. And this also informs where I am politically, in that one of the absolute fundamental basics to me is that local control is really important. I want somebody if somebody's going to make a decision that's going to impact my life, I want to be able to look them in the eye. I don't want federal stuff from on high coming down and telling me how to live, and I have no connection with these people. And in terms of the whole social racial tension thing, a lot of it feels quite manufactured to me. Now, some of it obviously is not. We have 4 grandkids. 2 of them are adopted, non-white. I understand a little bit of that world, and I'm not minimizing all of the very, very, very bad things that have happened. But in terms of how people interact on a daily basis, the thing that strikes me the most is that I don't feel that racial tension from people that are supposedly mad at me and hate me.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot less hate. This goes back to the thing of like getting in the truck and going out and talking to folks. There's a lot less hate out there than we might imagine. And there's a whole lot more folks like, and you've written about this, in some of your professional work, but I love the question, what keeps you up at night? And you go out and ask someone, they're not gonna be like, oh, how much I hate Black people. That's what keeps me up at night. You're like, that's never going to come out of anybody's mouth, because it's not what's keeping them up at night. It's other things like, how am I going to deal with the fact that my washing machine just broke? And washing machines, I don't even know which one to buy, and they're going to last 18 months, and I can't afford to buy another one in 18 months. And these are the real things that keep people up at night, the day-to-day things. They aren't federal problems for the vast majority of the time. We're worried about different stuff.
Yeah. And it feels, and that's one of the beauties of our country, honestly. You're in the U.S., I'm in the U.S. at the moment. I've lived overseas most of my early life. I've been to almost 50 countries now and worked in 40 of them. But one of the beauties of the U.S. is that we are really a United States of 50 different little countries. And we shouldn't try to level the playing field so that they all have to have the same perspective on things. It's okay to have different worlds and to value things a little bit differently. I'm a huge believer in fairness and equal opportunity. but I think there's room to look at the world a little bit differently. And one of the things I said in my last book was, I don't remember exactly how I said it, but something like, you need to be a world citizen. And that means that you need to go to a developing country or Mississippi if you can't travel far. I've caught some flack for that one, but because it just changes your perspective. And now all of a sudden, your notion that you deserve the right to love and enjoy your job, where did that bullshit come from? Like, most of the billions of people in the world, most of them, it's never occurred to them to love and enjoy their job. That's like, this is how I eat. And here you are telling me that you have it's like, that is a signal to me that you've never really traveled all that much, and that you believe in a different sort of exceptionalism than I do. And anyway, I don't even know what I'm ranting about now, but it's it's about people. It's about experiencing people individually and not getting your information from some political pundit or somebody who is an influencer, or you think about professional athletes, for instance. Why are we even listening to them? Like, what? Yeah.
On political positions. Like, hey, listen, you are a genius at something. It is not about foreign policy or economics. Like, you don't know the first thing about it, you know?
Yeah.
It's I think a lot about like what Thomas Sowell will write. And you're welcome to disagree with Thomas Sowell, but you're probably wrong. And you can find an economist that disagrees with him, but they probably disagree through decades worth of work. This isn't something that you just get to walk in and be a whatever, a baseball player or an actress or whatever it is, and have an informed opinion. It's just not, it's not possible to, I get you have a microphone and it's really loud, but it doesn't make you the professional that Thomas Sowell. You don't have to like Thomas Sowell, but you have to respect the fact that he spent his life learning about economics and policy and how these things work together.
Yeah, I'm going to listen to Thomas Sowell, and I'm going to have my bullshit meter cranked up to high, and it'll peg the meter every once in a while. But this is a very deeply learned person who's also been in that experience, and so I want to hear that. As opposed to a Candace Owens, for instance, I can't even stand to listen to her for 5 minutes, because it's just all pundit kind of bullshit that I don't have any patience for. But somebody who's careful and thoughtful and has lived that experience, I want to listen. I want to listen to everybody in that way.
Yeah, and has taken the time to process the data and is great at communicating. Again, you can disagree with his position, but you're going to have to work hard to have as much rigor in your position as he has gotten his. And that's just a fact. One of the things I'm curious about doing, I haven't done it yet. Maybe I won't do it, but I want to run the idea by you. Is we have people who have good intentions will often do things to convince you of something that is probably not true, because they overconvince. So there's a list of questions to teach you how much privilege, specifically white privilege, that you have. Mm-hmm. And it's a magician's trick where like the outcome is already known. Now I'm just going to ask you the questions to confirm to you that the outcome is there. You can do the same thing with living in the United States. Do you have potable water in your toilet right now? Yes. When you make waste into that toilet, you push a button, it disappears. Do you ever have to think about it again? No, I don't. And then you can go through all these things. Can you buy tacos at any time of the night where you live? Do you live within 200 miles of an MRI? All these different things. You'd have to say, wow, yeah, there's a lot of things that I have access to. But it takes perspective. You got to go meet people who live in a garbage dump, and they're stoked to have what they have, and they can't wait to find the next thing. You would never trade places with them in a million years to understand what we have here and how important it is for us to work on our own problems and solve things locally.
Yeah. I'm going to listen differently to somebody that has an agenda. I'll listen to somebody way more openly if it's more they want to talk about their lived experience, and they are actually as open to learning from my perspectives as I want to be in learning from their perspectives. But it's not a really interesting conversation if two people come to it and there's just no hope in hell that either one of them is going to change their minds. That's a waste of time. but having conversations with real people where you ask them, hey, can I ask you, this might be a sensitive question. I hope it doesn't offend you, but I really want to like, why did you get an abortion? And how did you think about it? And there's no sense of prejudgment. It's just honest curiosity. You feel like as a human, they deserve to be listened to carefully, and you deserve, if you want to be the kind of person that's interesting and constantly learning, you have to be open to adjusting what you think. And that gets more and more difficult as you get a hearing and you're known for certain things, and you get older and you're less open, you're less patient. It takes a lot more work to do that when you're older. And what's discouraging to me is to talk with somebody who's, say, in college, especially an elite college, who already has an opinion on everything. It's not a considered opinion, but it's an opinion. And I just look and I'm sad, because the world is more complex than that. There are some things you need to have a really strongly held belief about, but always there needs to be some little crack in there that says, maybe I'm wrong, and I'm open to that.
The world, again, is not binary. There are some things that are binary, but there are very few. Even gender, we know that. That's not like, just right from the beginning, when we talk about science, there is a green square on that roulette wheel that absolutely exists.
Right.
And so, well, there goes that binary thing, and so we struggle with that. But we also struggle with the fact that there's trade-offs. Whatever you want, you have to be ready to lose everything. I use medical care with this example a lot, but if we could have a state-of-the-art medical program, and that we could just start over instead of having this Frankenstein that we keep adding new arms to and cutting off a leg and putting a new leg on, we could just say, okay, we're going to hard reboot. Everybody's got to give up what they've got today, but what we're all going to get back is something that is better than what everybody has. Right. Nobody would get in that line and say, I'm ready to give up everything I have to get something better. We just want the thing that we want politically or whatever. We actually don't want to solve the problem. We just want to bitch about the problem and then have only our solution. And so if you're not ready to give up everything, you're not ready to trade off some comfort, you can't reliably and repeatedly improve a situation.
Yeah. We really don't need many more laws or regulations. We really need to step back, and the way our life works at the moment looks like an overhead view of Boston, where nobody in their right mind would have planned the streets that way. And it needs a complete rework, like you said, but there are very few people who have both the power to do that, mm-hmm. and are willing to sacrifice that power in order to make it happen. I mean, we have really, I don't know if it's just because we tend to view leaders very differently 20, 30, 100 years later, but it doesn't feel like we have the kind of leaders that are giving us a really interesting option, and then we'll have an honest discussion about it. I mean, honestly, with 300 and some, I don't know how many people are in the US, 300 and some million people, honestly, Donald Trump and Joe Biden were the best options. What kind of universe is that in? It just blows my mind. Again, I know I'm not that interested in going down political, but it's such a staggering example to me. Like we have CEOs leading hundreds of thousands of companies out there who are better leaders than either one of those two people. And what kind of a broken system is that?
I can reliably make myself sound like a good presidential candidate by just saying things that are patently ridiculous, but because we're at that point. So if he was president, he would come in and say, I'm going to cut half of the executive orders out. I'm going to reduce the power of the presidency. You guys in Congress have 60 days to sort out whatever it is that I'm going to do. And then people will be like, yeah, I'll do that. I'll take that. I'll take Pete. Pete has no business being president, but I know that, like, I know there are things to fix. You can literally pick anything and just say the most preposterous thing, and people will be like, yeah, do that.
It's like Veep was way too close to reality. Did you watch that show? Yeah.
And so you watch someone like Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I mean, you just watch the people that they are. You can't pick those people. You can't pick them.
Yeah. How can we be, or I've worked on the inside of lots of major corporations. I don't anymore. I lost patience with it. But I remember finishing a day of consulting and walking out into the parking lot to my rented car and just shaking my head slowly to myself. How in the world did we become the most powerful nation on earth with these idiots running things? And it is kind of staggering. And then if you've traveled to developing cultures, you really realize how good we have it in many ways. And it's kind of amazing that it's not more of a cluster than it is, really.
Yeah. No, it's a really interesting thing. What are some of the common problems that you can identify if you were to go back to corporate consulting or whatever and walk in? Like, what's just default at the ready? Like, I don't have to even think about this. I already know you're screwing up A or X. Or B.
Yeah. I think it would all start with having more courageous conversations and not letting things go where they are. There's a firm in the UK called Blessing White, and they've put this really interesting video together about the different types of employees and how employee engagement happens and so on. And they call one group of employees the quit and stay type. And when I think about how easy it is to hide as an incompetent employee in a large corporation, that's one thing you'd have to fix, is making courageous decisions that weren't constantly being compared against a PC particular way to do it. Another thing I think is I just see corporations getting way too ahead of their skis and touching on social issues, which they have no business doing in my mind. It's like, just make this widget for me and make it really good, a high value. I don't care about the rest of it, okay? I'll sort that out of my personal life. You see that with the Olympics recently. So it's just down to basic human stuff, and then being a good leader, which means listening and guiding. And it's not any big magic thing. It's just like being a good leader. That's what's missing in most cases.
There's a lot to be said for that. Good leaders. So I had a guy named Joe Musselman on the show, and we talk at a high level about culture, because we've learned about culture, and folks talk about empathy. And you can watch on LinkedIn, every third post has, I'm an empath, I'm empathy, I've got high EQ. But what about CQ? Like, you have to understand culture is upstream from emotional intelligence. If you can't tolerate someone else's culture, then you're going to struggle to get these things right. And the social issues is a cultural thing. Like, this will change. This will be something else later on. I'm not minimizing. I'm not suggesting anybody should be harmful or bad to anybody else. But the fact is you have to tolerate, in a free society, you have to tolerate someone else's freedom. And if you can't do that, then jinkies, you are moving towards totalitarianism and authoritarianism.
Yeah, in the last 5 or 6 years, there's been so much of that. You can't even recognize conservatives who are the ones doing things that they were against for 100 years. And you see progressives doing the same thing. And it's like, wait a second, did I just wake up from a coma for a decade? Like, what happened to the world? What is it? Why can't we just let this stuff? Why do we have to fight about all of this stuff? Some of it is worth fighting about, but fighting about as careful, empathetic humans, not as people shouting their position without any hope of them even considering a different perspective on it.
So when a leader is throwing these things, hey, we have to have a corporate social responsibility. We need to have a DEI person. We need to have. These are all cost centers, right? They can be really expensive if you don't address them, but you're getting thrown things that aren't making widgets. That aren't improving the process. It's not improving quality. It's stuff that has to do with performative behavior, if I'm going to be unfair.
Right. Yeah. And there's, I think that we're beginning to realize that really what we need to do is be better humans, that somehow standing up a DEI department may not help and may actually make things worse. Not saying that the motive behind it is wrong, because it's not, but maybe we just need to be better humans. And
I can predict the future sometimes. I predict that DEI departments are going to cause lawsuits against companies because they're not going to get it right, because you can't just jam ideology down people's throat reliably and not get sued for it. Like, it's just going to happen. It's just like all these modern tech companies that have a keg flowing in the break room. Someone is going to get raped because they got drunk at work. It's just going to happen. You just can't do those things reliably and keep out of trouble.
Yeah. It's a mixed up world. Too bad we didn't solve it today.
Oh, come on. I thought we had it all figured out. Well, listen, I don't want to keep you any more than an hour that I asked you for. So, by the way, Dickie, thanks for commenting. Always great when we have you in the show, throwing in your comments. Everybody should go to David's website or just follow him on LinkedIn. That's super easy to find, David C. Baker. You also can check out his previous episode there. Definitely get his book on expertise. Just read any of his stuff and you'll get why I like to have him on the show. David, anything in closing?
Well, thank you I love the fact that we had an unscripted, real conversation. I'll probably end up regretting a whole bunch of stuff we talked about tomorrow, but that's a sign that it was a good conversation. So thank you, Pete.
All right, stand by.